Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are going to be working on the matching pillowcase for the spiked ombre granny chevron Afghan baby blanket. So this is a super easy blanket or super easy pillow cover. However, you may have some how do I say this? It is a little complicated sewing this part of the pillow cover together. Past that, super simple, okay? Let's go ahead and go straight into what we need. Now, if you're making this and you've already made the blanket, that's awesome. It's going to be a little bit easier for you. However, if you haven't made the matching blanket and you're making the pillow, let's talk about a few things. The yarn I use for this is a gradient pack from Herrschner's. There, you can see it. So what it is a gradient pack from Herrschner's that I had bought, and what it is they set it up the colors to, in the pack. But you can use any 4-weight yarn you choose. This is just a regular 4-weight acrylic yarn. You can use whatever colors you want to. It doesn't have to be the gradient or the ombre. So this is the blue pack. However, they have a red, a green, they have a black, dark gray, light gray, white pack, which is really pretty. I think they have a pink and a purple. Anyway, so I'll put a link in the description box so you guys can check out the different colors they have. Now, I used one skein, or not even one skein. I mean, you can see this is what I used to make the pillow cover. So, I mean, you don't even need a full skein for that. Now, however, for the blanket, I did use one full skein and then partial of another one. So, anyway, you're going to need the 6mm crochet hook, scissors, you're going to need a yarn needle to weave in your ends, and you're going to need something, whatever you choose to use to mark your stitches. And we're not going to use that through the actual making of the pillow cover. What we do is we use that along this seam right here when we sew it together. What we do is we keep the points marked and held together as we stitch it shut. And what that does is help us stay nice and aligned. So you can use stitch markers, you can use scrap yarn, whatever you want to use, doesn't matter. Just something to hold these together as we're sewing this shut to keep it nice and concise. Alright, so I went through the yarn, your hooks, your needle. Now let's talk about the pillow. I used a 14 by 20 travel pillow. I bought this at Walmart in the pillow section. The reason I chose this pillow is because this pattern. This pattern has to be displayed lengthwise, right? Because we got to be able to see the chevron. So if it was a normal pillow this wide, I mean, we wouldn't have a chevron. We'd have like half a peak in a valley. It just wouldn't look right. So that's why I went with the longer pillow. But you can use any pillow you choose. You can use an old throw pillow. You can use, you know, just a normal pillow insert, whichever you want. All right, let's talk now about how you get the width you need for your pillow. So if you have made the blanket already, that's perfect, because what I want you to do is set the blanket on top of your, if you haven't made the blanket, just hold on just a second. But if you have made the blanket, set the blanket on top of your pillow, and I want you to hold one edge of your blanket with the side seam of your pillow. And I want you to bring it over, not fully to the other seam, but half, like, you know, don't bring it all the way to the seam, but just a little shy. And I want you to count your chevrons. So you have a half here and a half here. And then how many full ones do you have? How many peaks do you have in the middle? So I have a half and a half with 1, 2, 3 peaks. So 2 halves and 3 holes make 4. So that's how I got my stitch count. I counted 18 times 4 plus 7. So that got me to 79. Okay, so that's our stitch count. 18, 18, 18, 18 plus 7 is what you need to chain for your pillow. So if you haven't made the blanket and you're making the pillow, what I want you to do is I want you to chain a length that is past your, so chain a length 18, 18, 18, 18, 18 plus 7, whatever you're, you know, close to the width of your pillow. But I want you to take your chain that you, your very first chain, and set it right on the seam of that pillow, right on the side seam of the pillow. And then I want you to bring it all the way around and go past your side seam just a little bit. Now, the reason we do that is because once we work the actual chevron, it shrinks up. Okay, so, and we don't want this pillow cover to be the exact dimensions of this pillow, because once we put the pillow inside, it would be way too baggy on that pillow, and it would just wouldn't look right because it would be too baggy on the pillow. So we want it a little bit shy of seam to seam. So if you haven't worked the matching blanket yet, chain 18, 18, 18 plus 7, whatever is a good length. Hold your first chain to the side seam of your pillow, bring it all the way to the other side, and go past that side seam just a little bit, maybe about 2 inches. Yeah, I'd say go a good 2 inches, go past that side seam. And then what you're going to have to do is work row 1, because row 1 is what starts the chevron, and then hold it up to your pillow and say, you know, hold it to that side seam, and then we want it just a tad bit shy of the side seam now, because once we work the chevron, it shrinks it up a little bit. So I know that's a pain in the butt, but that's the perfect way to figure out your exact chain, you know, with your tension, with the pillow you're choosing to use, and, you know, and in some cases, the yarn you're using can definitely change the length of your cover. So, follow that step, and then get you a good chain length, and then we're gonna start the pattern. Now, I wanna say something real quick, because I'm gonna explain it further in just a minute, but what I wanted to say is that instead of me filming another hour and a half showing you how to work this pattern, what I've done is I've inserted the clip from the blanket showing you how to work the pattern. It's the exact same. The only difference is the length that you have for your piece. Whereas in the tutorial, you're going to see I talk about how we're actually working the blanket. The only difference is you know that you're working the pillow, which is specific to your pillow chain length. Excuse me. Okay, and that's it. That's just, it's that, oh, excuse me, it's that simple. The hardest part of this entire thing, I promise you, is this right here, which I try my best to explain to you what I'm doing and how I did it. And how yours turns out may be a lot better than mine, because mine's not perfect, but look at the end piece. It's beautiful. Okay, guys, so get your supplies together, and I'm going to insert a little part right here explaining better what I'm talking about for the whole blanket piece that I've inserted here. But get your stuff together, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how this video is set up. So instead of me going back through everything that I already just filmed to show you guys how to work this pattern, I'm just going to insert the clip of me working the pattern for the Afghan, or for the blanket. It's the exact same thing that we're going to do for the pillow cover. It's just our stitch count's different. That's the only thing that's different. You work the exact same pattern. Now, like I said in the intro, you know, to get the width you need for the pillow that you choose to use. Like I said, I'm working with the travel pillow, so I worked my chain, set it on top there. I didn't want it to go exactly the length of the pillow. We want it just a tad bit short. And then I repeated what you're going to see in the blanket tutorial that I'm getting ready to show. I just repeated those rows the exact same way, and I ended on the opposite color. So I started with the dark blue, but I don't want to end with the dark blue, because when we stitch this together, it would be a big chunk of dark blue, and I want it to be a continuous round. So it's, you know, dark blue, darker, dark, light, darkest, darker, darker, light, darkest, darker, darker, end in light, starts all the way back over again. Okay, so that's, I want to jump on here and explain to you, that's the way I've set up this video so I don't have to spend another hour and a half filming this. But I may say things that's going to refer to the blanket, but I want you guys to know that this is for the pillow cover, okay? So all you have to do is repeat this until it's just shy, repeat the pattern until it's just shy of fitting around our pillow, because we want it to give a little bit, just like that, okay? So it'll be a good fit around our pillow, okay? All right. So I'm going to tell you, mine measures from peak to valley. So I'm measuring from the peak right here to the valley up here, 24.5 inches, okay? And then the width is just a tad over 17, so I'm going to say 17.25. Okay, so, but like I said, yours is going to be different because you may not use the same pillow I have. We're just gonna, measure it over the pillow. We don't want it to be the exact width, and we don't want it to be the exact length, okay? So get your panel done and come back here, and we are going to assemble this. Okay, guys, so once you have your chain count worked out, figured out how wide or how long you want your chain to be, go ahead and get your chain done and come back here. Now, I've got a little sample done since I've gotten my blanket done already. Mine, I did 18, what was it, 18 times 3 plus 7, 61? Yes, that's correct. Okay, so let's get started. Row 1, we are going to work 3 double crochet into the 7th chain from our hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to work 3 double crochet in there. Now we're going to skip 2 chains, skip 2, and now we're going to shell into the next chain, So shell is 3 double crochet. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to say that throughout the pattern, shell, shell into the next chain. Instead of saying 3 double crochet. Sorry, I'm getting some slack. Okay. Now back to the pattern. All right, so we worked 3 into the 7th chain from our hook, skip 2, shell into the next, skip 2, and then we're going to shell into the next. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to skip 5 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And into that very next chain right there, we're going to work another shell. And what we're doing is creating the valley of the chevron. So work your shell into the 6th. We skip 5 into the next. We work our shell. And if I lay this down, you can see how it naturally just wants to lay angled. And that's our valley. Okay? So now we skip 2, skip, skip, into the next, work our shell. All right, now we're going to skip 2, and into the next chain, we're going to work the peak. And the peak is 3 double crochet, chain 2, and then right back into that same chain, 3 double crochet. So we skip 2 into the next. We work our peak, 3 double, chain 2, go back in there for 3 double, and that is our peak. So now if I lay it down again, you can see how it's already created the boop boop. Okay, now we're going to come back down to our peak. So we skip 2, shell into the next. Skip 2, shell, you see that? Skip 2, shell into the next. So if you notice, we have not our beginning part, but right here, we have our valley, 2 shells, peak, 2 shells, now we're going to work the valley. So our valleys and our peaks are going to be separated by 2 shells. All right, so I've got my peak here, my 2 shells, so I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then into that next chain we're going to work our shell. And I'm trying to keep this first double crochet of the shell after the valley, trying to keep that not tight, but don't let it get real long and stretched out. Okay, so there's our valley. Now we got 1 shell, we need 1 more shell. So we skip 1, 2, and into the next we work our another shell. And now you can see valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, peak. Okay, so I got my 2 shells. I'm going to skip 2 chains and into that next chain work my peak, which again is the, I should just say shell, chain 2, shell into the same chain. Chain 2. Darn it, get in there. 1, 2, 3. All right, so now we're going to skip 2, shell into the next. Skip 2, skip 2 chains, shell into the next. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I want you guys to repeat that across. Repeat your, try to find something to point with. Repeat your valley, your valley, 2 shell, peak, 2 shell, valley, 2 shell, peak, 2 shell, valley. Oh, excuse me. Repeat that across. So you skip 5 chains for your valley, into the next with the shell, skip 2 chains, shell into the next, skip 2 chains, peak into the next chain, skip 2 chains, shell, skip 2 chains, shell, skip 5 chains for your valley, shell into the next, skip 2 chains, shell, skip 2 chains, valley, and repeat that across your guys' chain, okay? And then when we get to the end, this is what you should have all the way across to the end. So we've got our peak, shell, shell. So I'm ready for my valley. So I skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into the very next chain with my shell. Skip 2 chains, shell into the next. Skip 2 chains, and then we should be into that very last chain. And can you guys guess what we need to work into that very last chain? We have our valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell. The very last chain gets the peak. So that's the shell, chain 2, go right back into that same chain with the shell. All right, and that is the end of row 1. So this is what your piece should be looking like. We have the, let me get it on camera, we have the chain 7 here, and we have 3 shells, and then we go into our pattern with our valley, 2 shell, peak, 2 shell, valley. And your valley will roll up like that, but that's all right, it ain't gonna hurt nothing. Where was I? Peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, and then you end with a peak. Okay, so that's the end of row 1. And to move on to row 2, we are going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn. Okay, so I need to turn my pattern page. Okay, so for row 2, we're holding our work, and right into the chain 2 of our very first peak right there, right into that very first chain 2, we're going to work 3 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, just like that, okay? Now in between the next 2 shells, so that gap right there, right between there, we're going to shell. So we're going to go right in there and work a double crochet. Or I mean a double crochet shell, I should say. Sorry. Give me some slack. All right. And now we work a shell into the next space. 1, 2, 3. So now we're to our valley. So we have our beginning chain, 3 shell, and now we start with our repeat. Skip the valley. So to skip, all we're going to do is just jump straight across, just like we're skipping the chain 5. Just pretend like it's here, and all we're doing is just jumping right across. And that's what creates the valley of the chevron. So make sure you work that first double crochet pretty nice, or not nice, but tighter, so that it's not really stretched out. And then finish your shell. Okay, see how it dips? All right, now we got 1 shell before our peak, and we have the next space where we're going to work our next shell. That was my stomach. I haven't eaten breakfast, I'm hungry. Okay, so we have our valley, shell, shell, and we're up to our peak. So now we work our peak into the chain 2 of the peak of our previous row. So that's a shell, chain 2, go right back in there with our shell. All right, and now we come down to our valley. So we work a shell into the next space, right in there. Then we shell into the next space, and then we skip our valley, shell into the next space, shell into the next space. You're at your peak. And now we come back down to towards the valley. So we got a shell in the next space, shell in next space, and there's our valley. So we jump right across, skip, shell into the next space, shell into the next space. So I want you guys to repeat that across, and all you're doing is working shells into the spaces between the previous row's shell. And we're still keeping the 2 shell peak, 2 shell valley, 2 shell peak, 2 shell valley. Okay? So shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley. Shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys repeat that row 2 across, and I'm going to come back when we get to the end, okay? Alrighty, so we have repeated that. Oh, I gotta adjust my seat. Repeated that across. We've got our, there you can see it, our peak, 2 shell, skip valley, 2 shell, peak. 2 shell, skip valley, 2 shell, and now we're to the end, and we've got this chain 7 right here, or chain 6 actually. And can you guys guess what we're going to work into that? Well, we got our peak, shell, shell, valley, peak, or I'm sorry, shell, shell, peak. So into that chain, oop, that's not the right hook. Into that chain 6 space right here, we're going to work a peak. So shell, chain 2, shell. All right, so that is the end of row 2. And like I said, the chains from skipping at the beginning, skipping the valleys at the beginning is gonna curl up on us, but that's all right. It ain't gonna hurt nothing. I thought about putting fringe along the top and the bottom of the blanket, but I was like, nah, still not the project. I don't know how long it's been that I have wanted to put fringe at the top and the bottom of a baby blanket, and I've got to find the right one, and I just haven't made it yet. All right, so to move on to row 3, we're going to chain 4 and turn. And what we're going to do is repeat row 2. So right into the top of that shell, or into the top of that peak, we're going to work 1 shell. And then we're going to shell into each space between the next shells, the next 2. So 1, 2, and then we're to our valley. So we skip this, shell into the next space, and then to the next space, and then peak into the chain 2 of our previous row's peak. So it's the same thing. Shell, shell, skip the valley. Shell, shell, peak. Shell, shell, skip the valley. Shell, shell, peak. All right, so repeat that. Get off me. Repeat that across, and I'm going to meet you when we get to the end, okay? Okay, so I've repeated that across, and I've got my peak, shell, shell, valley, peak, 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 shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, and we're to the end. And to that chain 4, we're going to work our peak. One, 2, 3 doubles, chain 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we are going to change colors. All right, so to change colors, we're going to chain 1, pull up a loop, and cut. Pull that, and there we go. All right, so now in my color sequence, I started with the darkest. Now I'm going to go to the next lightest. I'm going to go to the shade lighter, 1 shade lighter. So I'm going to go, which in mine is Royal. All right, so get a slip knot on your hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach right into the top of that last double crochet that we worked. Right into the top of that. and chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to tighten up that slip knot. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my work. And now we're going to start row 4. Okay, so row 4, it's pretty similar to row 2. The only difference is this row is where we start the spiked shells. Okay, so into that first chain 2, we're going to work our 3 double, just like normal. Okay, now we're going to come to our next space just like we would with our normal shell, and we're going to start with 1 regular double, and then the second double crochet we are going to work into the top of the double crochet that is actually 2 rows below. So like this row would be 1 row below, this is 2 rows below. So the shell you're working right above, we're going to work that middle double crochet right into the top of it, just like a normal double crochet, but you're going to be working over the space, over the stitches, not the stitches. Basically what we're doing is working over the top of the last double crochet and the last double, well, first double and last double right here. So we're going to come down and insert your hook right into the top of that middle double right there. Grab your working yarn from behind, and then we're going to bring it and pull it up, but watch the yarn on my hook. See how it shifted just a little? And then we're going to work that double. And then we're going to go back into the space, not into the double, but into the space. So you might need to wiggle your fingers in there, and then you're going to find the space and work a double. So it's the same space that first double crochet is into. And then we come down, double into the top of that double, bring your loop up, and then give it just a little more height, and then finish your double. So that's the spiked. Okay, so we're going to do that. Into the next space. Double like normal. And now we're going to work the spiked. So we yarn over, come down to that middle double from 2 rows below, grab your yarn, pull it up, and then shift it up just a little and finish the double. And now we got to double into the space, the same space that first double's into. So wiggle your fingers in there if you need to till you find your space, and then work your double. So that's the spiked. So we're to the valley, so we're going to skip the valley and now work our spiked shell. Go in, grab your yarn, pull it up, finish the double, and then double into the space. One more time. Normal double crochet. Come down into the top of the double from 2 rows below, grab your yarn, pull it up, adjust just a little bit for some more extra height, finish your double, and then go back into the same space and double. So that's our spiked granny, okay? All right, so now we're to our peak, and we just work our normal peak. Shell, chain 2, go back in there, and work a shell. Okay, so I think you guys got a pretty good handle. I mean, it's the same thing. All we're doing is just working that little spiked double crochet. All we're doing is working it into the double that we're working right above. That work into the middle double of the shell we're working right above. Okay, so I think you guys can handle that. We still have our 2, I'm going to say spiked shells. We have our 2 spiked shells, valley, 2 spiked shells, peak, 2 spiked shells, valley, 2 spiked shells, peak, 2 spiked shells, valley, 2 spiked shells. Can you guess what's going to go into the last? All right, so I'm going to work mine across, and I'm going to meet you guys when we get to that end. All right. Sorry. All right, I worked that across. I've got my 2 spikes shells, and into the last chain 4, we're going to work our peak. So 1, 2, 3 doubles. Chain 2 and 3 doubles. Okay, so now we just chain 4 and turn. 2, 3, 4. And then we repeat the normal double crochets. So we repeat rows 2, and then we're going to repeat row 3. So we just shell into the top of that chain 3, or chain 2, shell, shell, skip your valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, skip your valley, shell, shell, peak. So just like row 2 we did earlier. So double into the very first chain 2. I'm sorry, shell into the very first chain 2. Shell into the next. Space between your shells. Shell into the next space. Skip your valley, shell into the next space. Watch that first double. Shell into the next space. And then we're to our peak, so we work our peak. 3, or I'm sorry, shell. Ooh, my yarn got wonky there. Chain 2 and shell. Okay, so I think you guys can handle this on your own. We've done it several times already. So we shell, shell, skip your valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, skip your valley, shell, shell, and I'm going to meet you here, okay? Be right back. Okay, so I've repeated that across. We're to the last chain space, or chain 4, and that gets the peak. 1, shell, chain 2, and shell. All right, so that was the end of row 5, which row 5 was we just repeat row 2. So row 6, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to repeat row 3. Now, I don't want you to get confused. The reason why it's row 2 and row 3, because, I mean, row 3, we do the exact same thing as row 2. But row 3, the only difference is we fasten off our yarn. So that's why I didn't say row 3 is you repeat row 2. Because it's technically not, because at the end of row 3, we fasten off, and that's when we change colors. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, repeat row 2, repeat row 3. So that way, every 3 rows, we change color. All right, so I am going to go ahead and finish my, or not finish, but move on to our next row. So we chain 1, 2, 3, 4. And turn. And into that, so we're going to repeat row 3, and row 3 is into that very first chain 2. We work 1 shell, and then shell into the next space, and the next space, skip your valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley, shell, shell, peak, shell, shell, valley. So you guys repeat that across again, and I will meet you when we get to the end. Okay, so I've repeated that across. We're to the end, to that chain 4 right there, and I work my peak. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, go right back in there with another shell, 3 double crochet. All right, and to end, we chain 1, pull up a loop, and cut. So what we have is row 1, 2, 3. Okay? So 2 and 3, the pattern, I want to go through this and explain it so you guys don't get confused, or I'm not unintentionally confusing you. So row 1, we're working in our chains, right? So row 2, we double crochet, or we shell, I'm sorry, into the spaces. Row 3, it's the exact same thing that we just did on row 2. The only difference is we, over here, cut and fasten off. We change color and we start row 4. Now row 4 is where we start our spiked grannies. That's what gives it that pop of design in it. And then we start row 2. We repeat row 2. So we double, or we shell into each space between the shells, right? Row 3, we would work the exact same thing we did for row 2. The only difference is we fasten off, and then we attach a new color and work row 4. And then we work row 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, which we repeat all the way until you get to the desired length that you want for your blanket, which I have right here. So we worked 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4 spike granny, 2 regular granny chevron, 3 regular granny chevron, just fasten off at the end. Attach new color just like we did at the beginning. We're going to do that through the entire Afghan and repeat that. So you change color every 3 rows. And I wanted to explain that because that's why on row 3 I just didn't say repeat row 2, because technically the only difference is we're fastening off. Okay? All right, so that's it. You just work that and work that and work that as long as you want it to. And okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to do a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the word I want to say, helpful stitching. Not stitching, but what I'm doing is I'm using all those stitch markers that I said at the beginning, and I've folded my piece in half. And I have my peaks, and here's my valleys. This is a peak, this is a valley. So they're laying opposite of each other, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start on one end, and I'm going to take that chain valley, grab it with the stitch marker or yarn, or you don't even have to do this step. I'm just doing this to help me keep everything nice and neat as I stitch it closed, okay? So I'm going to grab that the chain, what was it, chain 5 valley, and I'm just going to hook it into a stitch on the valley on the opposite side of the panel. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into the chain 2 peak, and I'm going to hook it into the bottom of the peak from the on the opposite end. And like I said, this is basically just to help keep it in place as I'm stitching it closed. So grab that chain space, and I'm going to go right into the chain of that. Here and here. Here and here. Oop, I've got the wrong one. Make sure your peak, you're going into the bottom of that peak and into the top of that peak. Here and just anywhere right there. And now I'm going to try to lay this because I want to keep a nice, clean, concise, straight edge. So I got to fold this down a bit, and I'm just going to stitch it right there. So it's keeping a nice straight line all the way around. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing on this end. Fold this. So it's a nice straight line all the way around. So I snapped the last double crochet straight into the chain 6 from the very beginning. Okay? Alrighty, now we can start stitching this closed. Now, you can do this however you want to. You can sew it with needle and thread, you can slip stitch it, you can single crochet it, doesn't matter. I am going to, and you can do it with any color you want. I'm going to do it with the, I'm going to go with the darkest. The midnight. And I'm going to slip stitch this closed. I'm going to use my 6mm. But like I said, you guys can sew it. You can single crochet it. However you want to. But what we're going to do is we're going to attach into one side. And it doesn't matter which side you choose. I'm going to attach into one side. Work up. And then I'm going to work across this chevron. And then I'm going to stop. Okay, so I'm going to take my piece, I'm going to go into the side, and I'm just going to go straight into the chain. Now, I don't want to work like into the chain space. I want to go right into the stitches of that chain. And I'm going to go into the stitches of this chain. And slip stitch. And I'm just going to slip stitch right up the side. There, that's better. Don't go through the chain spaces, go through the actual chains. There. Oh, dang it. Maybe I should have done this with a smaller hook. Okay, so all I'm going to do is evenly space these slip stitches out, okay? Don't try your best not to bunch them up, because the more you bunch them, the more it's just going to bunch your work up like this, and we don't want that, okay? I'd rather you have too many than too little. And don't work them too tight, because if they're too tight, that's going to bunch it up too. So I'm to a chain, well, no. Maybe in these, when we're working through these chains, I might use a smaller crochet hook because I can't get into them. Okay, I'm going to let you guys slip stitch this all the way up, or single crochet or sew it, however you're doing it. And I'm going to meet you when we get to the top corner up here. Okay? Okay, so I've made it to that first corner, and I just stuck with this smaller crochet hook. I know I didn't mention that, but if you want to stay with the other crochet hook, that's fine. It's just, it was a little too hard to get into those chains. Alright, so I am going to hold this out like this so I can see where I am. And I'm just going to go into this corner the best I can. It's not going to be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and move my stitch marker so I can see what I'm doing. I'm basically trying to get it as straight as I can and just work some slip stitches. Okay, and now I'm going to repeat, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, evenly spacing out and loosely, especially since I went down a crochet hook. Space out these slip stitches until I get to the next stitch marker, because that's what's holding it together right there. So I'm still at this first peak right here. Almost to my stitch marker. Okay. So now we can see that turn. So here's where we started, and then we kind of turned a little bit, and now we're working into these peaks and valleys. So, I mean, it's nothing different. The only thing is that we're keeping a closer eye on where we are, but our stitch markers are helping. So we're just, remember, don't go around the chain, go straight through that chain, okay? And slip stitch, slip stitch, slip stitch, taking your stitch markers out as you go. And just slip stitch. And I'm going to work into the back loops of these double crochets from our last round. Okay? So I know this part is a big pain in the butt, and I know I'm probably not doing the best job explaining this. It's just this part is a pain. So if it's not perfect, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. All right, so slip stitch through here, and I'm going to meet you when we get to the end, okay? I promise you guys it's not going to look bad. It's going to look beautiful. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, so I've slip stitched across, and I'm coming to the end, and I've just been holding it the best I can to keep it, you know, straight right here. And you can see how this is the, you know, the last piece, and then here's where it's open right here. If your piece doesn't look like this, pull it out a little bit, hold this edge right here the best you can, and you know, you may need to skip some on this side, or you may need to skip some on this side, but as long as we can get this edge right here straight, we're gonna be good. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish slip stitching right here. Just going where I can go. All right, I'm gonna work it till the stitch marker. I'll be right back. Okay, so I made it to that stitch marker. I'm gonna take that out. I had to switch to my smaller hook because I could not get into this chain. All right, so that was my last slip stitch, and I'm gonna pull up a long loop, because what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go in and grab our corners and flip this inside out, right side out. And it doesn't matter if your which way your work was laying when we started this, because it's both the same. Okay, and now we can see that top seam. It's not perfect. Let me fold this a little bit so you can see it better. Right there. It's not perfect, but it looks good. I'm happy with it. All right, now what we're gonna do is get our pillow. I'm gonna rip these tags off. And I'm gonna put the pillow inside of my cover here. Now it is gonna be a snug fit, but that's what we want, because if it was loose, it would be way too saggy on our pillow. So I'm gonna have to do this off camera. I can't do it on, like, you know, in the field of vision of the camera. I gotta do it on my lap. But I'm getting it in there. Make sure to get the pillow, the corner of the pillow with the corner of the pillow cover. Okay. I almost wonder if this pillow could have just a little bit of stuffing taken out of it. I'm not going to, though. It looks good. So now what I'm doing is just... You guys are going to laugh at me, but what I'm doing is I'm wallering down the cotton inside of the pillow. There. Okay. So now I get my long loop that we created, right? I'm going to get that out of there and my working yarn out of there. And now we're just going to stitch this shut right along this top edge right here. So I'm going to line it up to where we stopped is at the very top corner. And I'm just going to slip stitch this shut right here. Okay, I'm just going to follow the same thing we've been doing and stitch this shut. I'm going to have to do it off camera because I have to hold the pillow in my lap and I can't do it on camera. But I'm going to do a couple the best I can with you guys. So everything's actually to the inside, but I'm just going to bring it right out. And I'm going to keep going like nothing happened, like nothing changed. Oops. Slip stitch. Go through that chain and slip stitch. I'm going to go through that chain again and this chain and slip stitch. Chain, okay, that's all I'm gonna work all the way down. All right, so you guys get that worked, or however you did it, you know, sewing it or single crocheting it, however you worked yours, get it done. And I'm gonna come back when I get to this end down here. Okay, we're almost done and it's so adorable. All right guys, I'll be right back. Okay, so I've made it down the side and I've got a little bitty piece I can get my finger in that I haven't slip stitched shut, so I'm just going to go right in there with a few slip stitches. Chain one, pull up a loop, cut, get a needle to weave in this end, and we're done, guys. That is it. Now, I do want to apologize because I understand fully that I'm going to weave this end into this dark color. Don't weave your lightest color into your dark color. Don't do that because you're going to see it. So I'm going to actually bring this back down. But like I was saying, I want to fully apologize. I understand completely that sewing or slip stitching it through the part right here was probably a huge pain in the butt, but I apologize. But look what you get when you're done. Look how pretty this is. If I could finish this. There. Okay. I am super happy with this. Right now what I'm doing is making sure the pillow is fully corner to corner with each part of the pillow cover. So like the corners of the pillow come to the corners of the cover. Just giving it little tugs. Okay. So there we go. There is the matching pillow for our spiked ombre granny. Oh, for Pete's sake, I can't get my words out today. The ombre spiked granny shell Afghan. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys had fun with this. Hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed my tutorial. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the pattern. Subscribe so you don't miss what I've got next. Hit that thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Check out the description box. I got all kinds of links down there for you guys. And that's it for me. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.